The night was merciless. Snow fell in heavy sheets, piling on the pavement outside street. Claire's hospital. Street lamps fought to pierce the storm, their glow bending in the icy wind. At the emergency exit, where staff usually stepped out for hurried breaks, a lone figure sat huddled on the concrete step. Claire Winters pulled her thin coat tighter, but it was no match for the biting cold. The heating inside the hospital had been broken for days, and after her double shift she didn't have the strength to walk to the bus stop. Her paycheck was already stretched thin, rent overdue, student loans mounting, her father's medical bills looming. So she stayed, shivering under the weak light, telling herself she could wait out the storm. Her fingers were numb, her lips pale. But it wasn't only the cold that made her tremble. It was exhaustion, the kind that sank deep into bone. Nurses weren't supposed to fall apart in front of patients, so she saved her unraveling for the empty nights, like this one. She didn't notice the sleek black car pulling up at the curb. Nor the tall man stepping out, his coat of tailored armor against the storm. He moved with quiet authority, the kind that came naturally to him, as if the world itself bent to his presence. Alexander Reed, CEO of Reed Enterprises, should not have been there. His company owned half the city, his time was worth fortunes, and his schedule was carved into minutes. But tonight, a meeting with a board member at the hospital had run late. He was used to passing through places without ever seeing them. Yet something, some flicker of movement, caught his attention. At first, he thought it was just another patient's family member. But when his eyes adjusted, he saw her, a young nurse, curled up like a sparrow against the cold, her shoulders quaking as she tried to disappear into herself. For reasons he couldn't explain, he stopped walking. The valet called his name, but he lifted a hand, dismissing him. His polished shoes crunched against the snow as he crossed toward her. She stiffened at his shadow. Slowly, she raised her head, and he was startled by the eyes that met his, blue, clear, but weary beyond her years. "You shouldn't be out here," he said, his voice deep, carrying over the wind. Claire blinked up at him, startled by the sharpness of his gaze. This man didn't belong in her world. Everything about him, the expensive wool coat, the leather gloves, the quiet steel in his tone, spoke of power and distance. Yet for some reason, he wasn't walking past. "I'm fine," she murmured, though her chattering teeth betrayed her. He studied her for a long moment. Most people melted under that stare, his boardroom had taught him the value of silence. But she didn't look away, though her eyes wavered as if she feared he might see the cracks beneath her fragile dignity. Alexander was a man who built walls. Walls around his company, walls around his heart. But that night, standing in the snow before a shivering nurse, one wall cracked without warning. "Come inside," he said finally, not as a suggestion, but as if he had already decided. She hesitated, torn between instinct and pride. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. Yet something in his voice made her believe, for just a breath, that he might not be a stranger at all. And for Alexander, who had lived years surrounded by noise yet starved of connection, it was the first time in months that he saw someone, and felt seen in return. Inside the staff lounge, the heater hummed weakly, struggling against the winter storm outside. Claire sat on the edge of a cracked vinyl chair, her arms wrapped tightly around her body, still thawing from the cold. She kept her eyes down, watching droplets of melted snow slide from her shoes and pool on the linoleum floor. Across from her stood the man who had brought her in. He didn't sit, didn't remove his coat, didn't even look like he belonged in such a place. He was too composed, too sharply cut from another world entirely. His name, she'd learned from the startled whispers of an orderly, was Alexander Reed. A name she'd seen in headlines, attached to skyscrapers and billion-dollar deals. And now, impossibly, he was standing in a dingy break room with her. "You shouldn't have been out there," he said again, quieter this time. His gaze was direct, but not unkind. "You could have frozen. I told you," she murmured, her voice raw, "I'm fine." He frowned slightly. It wasn't the answer he wanted. He was used to solutions, not evasions. The silence stretched, broken only by the hum of the heater. Finally, she lifted her head, daring to meet his eyes. Why did you even stop? Men like you don't notice women like me." His jaw tightened, but not in anger. In truth, she wasn't wrong. He lived in a world of boardrooms and transactions, where people were assets, not souls. But something about her, fragile, trembling, yet stubbornly upright, had stirred something he couldn't quite explain. "I noticed," he said simply. Claire blinked at him, startled by the weight of those two words. He stepped closer, resting one hand against the back of the chair opposite hers, as though anchoring himself before saying what he was about to say. His tone dropped, steady but urgent, almost as though he were confessing a secret. "You need a home," he said. She froze. The words landed heavily, impossibly. Her lips parted, but no sound came. He drew in a breath, his throat tight. "I need a mother for my daughter." The room seemed to stop. Even the hum of the heater faded into silence. Claire stared at him, certain she had misheard. What?" Her voice cracked. He didn't flinch. His eyes, dark and unwavering, held hers. "I'm not offering charity. I'm offering an arrangement. You're clearly struggling. And my daughter," his voice faltered briefly, as though speaking of her pulled something raw from him. "She needs someone. More than a nanny. More than the revolving door of caretakers who don't last. She needs kindness, stability, a presence I can't give her alone." Claire shook her head, half in disbelief, half in nervous laughter. "Do you even hear yourself? You don't know me. You don't know anything about me. And you're asking me to, what? Step into your life like it's a job description." His lips curved, but not in amusement, it was a rueful, almost pained expression. "I know how it sounds. But sometimes the strangest things are the ones that make the most sense." She pressed her hands against her knees, grounding herself. Her chest rose and fell quickly, her breath uneven. The idea was absurd, almost insulting. And yet, when she looked at him, she didn't see mockery. She saw a man who looked as exhausted as she felt. His wealth and power wrapped him like armor, but beneath it, she glimpsed something else, loneliness. Her heart twisted, despite herself. "You can't just decide something like that," she whispered. "No," he agreed, his voice low, steady. "But maybe, we can decide together." The words lingered in the air, fragile and dangerous. For a long moment, neither spoke, as if the snowstorm outside had swallowed the world, leaving only the two of them and a question that could change everything. The city glittered below like 1,000 jewels, each skyscraper window glowing against the night sky. From the penthouse, Alexander Reed had the best view of it all. Power, wealth, prestige, the skyline itself bore his name on half its towers. Yet as he stood before the floor-to-ceiling glass, a crystal tumbler of untouched scotch in his hand, he felt only the hollowness pressing in. Behind him, silence reigned. Too much silence. The kind that seeped into the bones. He loosened his tie and set the glass aside without tasting it. Scotch had long ago stopped dulling the ache. The apartment was perfect, polished marble floors, gleaming steel fixtures, furniture that had cost more than most families made in a year. His housekeepers kept it spotless, lifeless. It wasn't a home. It was a showroom, and he was the mannequin inside it. He thought of her again, the nurse from the hospital. The way she had sat outside in the storm, trembling yet holding her chin high. Alexander Reed didn't make reckless decisions, but tonight, his words to her still echoed in his mind. "You need a home. And I need a mother for my daughter." It had slipped out before he'd thought it through. And yet, wasn't it the truth? A small sound broke his thoughts, a light patter of footsteps. He turned, and there she was. Lily. His daughter stood in the hallway, a tiny silhouette clutching her stuffed rabbit, its ears ragged from constant love. She wore pink pajamas, her hair tousled, her eyes sleepy but searching. "Daddy." Her voice was soft, uncertain. He crouched down immediately, his stern exterior softening as he opened his arms. "Lily," he murmured. She patted over and pressed herself against him, small arms circling his neck. He held her tightly, breathing in the faint scent of lavender shampoo. "Another nightmare?" he asked gently. She nodded against his shoulder. The dark was too loud. His chest ached. What kind of father couldn't even make his child feel safe at night? He had built empires, signed contracts that shifted markets, commanded entire industries. Yet the simple act of chasing away his daughter's fear felt like something always slipping out of his grasp. "I'm here," he whispered, rocking her slightly. "I'll always be here." But even as he said it, he felt the truth press down. He wasn't enough. He carried her back to her room. The walls were painted soft cream, shelves lined with storybooks and dolls. Everything money could buy was there. But what she reached for, night after night, wasn't a toy, it was him. He tucked her into bed, smoothing the blanket over her. Her big brown eyes blinked up at him. "Daddy, why don't I have a mommy like the other kids?" The question cut deeper than any boardroom betrayal ever could. His throat tightened. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, forcing a smile. "Because sometimes," he said carefully, "life doesn't go the way we expect. But that doesn't mean we can't find happiness." She yawned, clutching the rabbit tighter. "Will we ever have one?" His hand stilled on the blanket. He didn't answer immediately. How could he explain the truth, that her mother had left before Lily was even 2 years old, unable to handle the weight of responsibility, leaving both of them behind? How could he tell her he'd tried, but every caretaker he hired had left too, unable to endure his demanding schedule or Lily's fragile heart? Instead, he kissed her forehead. "Sleep now, my little star." When she finally drifted off, Alexander stood in the doorway for a long time, staring at the rise and fall of her tiny chest. Guilt clawed at him. She deserved more. Someone who could give her warmth, patience, the gentleness he could never master. He returned to the living room, staring again at the glittering city. And he thought, once more, of the nurse with the tired eyes and trembling hands. She had looked as though she needed saving. But perhaps, it was him who needed saving, too. Claire lay awake on the narrow bed in her studio apartment, staring at the ceiling cracked with water stains. The radiator hissed, weakly, barely fighting off the chill that had followed her from the hospital. She pulled the thin blanket tighter, but it wasn't the cold keeping her from sleep. It was his voice. "You need a home. And I need a mother for my daughter." The words echoed like a bell she couldn't unhear. She sat up abruptly, pressing her hands to her face. It had to be some kind of cruel joke. Men like Alexander Reed didn't make offers like that. Not to women like her. She was a nurse barely keeping her head above water, burdened with debts and responsibilities that never eased. He was a man who owned half the city. Their worlds weren't just separate, they were galaxies apart. And yet, when she remembered his eyes, dark, steady, filled with something raw, she couldn't quite dismiss him as arrogant or mocking. He hadn't looked at her the way men sometimes did, sizing her up, seeing only what they wanted. No, his gaze had been searching, pleading, almost. She shook her head and got up, pacing the tiny room. Her reflection in the cracked mirror by the dresser caught her eye. Pale skin, circles under her eyes from too many night shifts, hair pulled back in a tired bun. A mother, she thought bitterly. She could barely mother herself. Memories surfaced unbidden, her own mother humming lullabies while brushing Claire's hair, before illness had stolen her warmth too soon. Her father, once strong, now frail and confined to a care facility she could barely afford. She had learned to survive by herself, to stand on shaking legs when no one was left to hold her up. She pressed a hand to her chest. What did she have to give a little girl who had already lost too much? Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She glanced at the screen. Another overdue notice. Rent. Second warning. She swallowed hard, her throat tight. How much longer could she keep doing this, working until her body gave out, borrowing from one bill to pay another, pretending she wasn't one bad day away from losing everything? Alexander's words whispered again. You need a home. The offer was outrageous, insane. And yet, for the first time in months, she had allowed herself to imagine something different. Not just survival, but a place where she wasn't alone. A place where laughter existed. But was that really what he was offering? Or was she nothing more than a convenience to him, a caretaker for his daughter, someone to fill a role until it suited him otherwise? She sank back onto the bed, hugging her knees. She could still feel the weight of his presence in that small hospital lounge, the way his words had cracked something inside her. She hated herself for even considering it. And then, another memory rose, his daughter. Though she hadn't met the child yet, Claire had seen a glimpse in his eyes when he spoke of her. For a moment, the powerful CEO's mask had slipped, and she had seen a man terrified of failing his little girl. That look had pierced her. Because she knew what it was like to be a child who needed more than the world was willing to give. Her chest ached. No, she whispered to the empty room, as if saying it aloud might make it true. It's impossible. But her voice trembled. Because deep down, a part of her, small, frightened, and hopeful, wasn't so sure.